The Augustan Age. The 18th century in English literature has been called the Augustan Age, the Neoclassical Age, and the Age of Reason. The term the Augustan Age comes from the self-conscious imitation of the original Augustan writers, Virgil and Horace, by many of the writers of the period. Specifically, the Augustan Age was the period after the Restoration era to the death of Alexander Pope. The major writers of the age were Pope and John Dryden in poetry, and Jonathan Swift and Joseph Addison in prose. Dryden forms the link between Restoration and Augustan literature. Although he wrote ribald comedies in the Restoration vein, his verse satires were highly admired by the generation of poets who followed him. And his writings on literature were very much in a neoclassical spirit. But more than any other, it is the name of Alexander Pope which is associated with the epoch known as the Augustan Age, despite the fact that other writers such as Jonathan Swift and Daniel Defoe had a more lasting influence. This is partly a result of the politics of naming inherent in literary history. Many of the early forms of prose narrative common at this time did not fit into a literary era which defined itself as neoclassic. The literature of this period, which conformed to Pope's aesthetic principles and could thus qualify as being Augustan, is distinguished by its striving for harmony and precision, its urbanity, and its imitation of classical models, such as Homer, Cicero, Virgil, and Horace, for example in the work of the minor poet Matthew Prior. In verse, the tight heroic couplet was common, and in prose essay and satire were the predominant forms. Any facile definition of this period would be misleading. However, as important as it was, the neoclassicist impulse was only one strain in the literature of the first half of the 18th century. But its representatives were the defining voices in literary circles, and as a result it is often some aspect of neoclassicism which is used to describe the era.